Welcome to the 2-minute warning interview series, where we take an insightful, if rapid, dive into the energy transition and what it means for the Middle East and beyond. Very happy to introduce Dr. 𝗤𝖷𝖢𝖫, the Executive Secretary of Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶, with us today. Hi, Dr. 𝗤𝖷𝖢𝖫.
Hello, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. Western Asian nations are diverse. They all have different resources, different economic goals, and this is increasingly the case as the push for decarbonisation intensifies. Countries are moving at different paces. Which country or countries perhaps do you see the most progress from in terms of climate mitigation acceleration this year? Which bright spots do you anticipate?
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, as you are aware, the Arab region takes mitigations very seriously. And we at 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 expect to see progress on mitigation throughout the Arab region in terms of improvement of energy efficiency and uptake of renewable energy in 2021. Many Arab states, as you know, have committed to increasing the share of renewable energy in their energy mix. For example, we see Morocco committing to 50% by 2030. We see Egypt committing 40% by 2035. Oil-producing states such as UAE, Qatar, Algeria are committing between 20 and 30 within the next 20 years. But more important, we have already seen some encouraging announcement recently in the past months. Saudi Arabia, as you know, has announced its plan to invest up to $200 billion to develop the line, a zero-carbon city. UAE submitted its second national determined contribution in December 2020 with increased ambition, setting economy-wide target to reduce annual emission by 23% by 2030. And most importantly,
the NDC, of course, is part of the broader Paris Climate Agreement, and is part of that structure, yes.
Yes, and most important, we have in the Arab region, the lowest cost of production of solar unit was in the Arab region with significant solar power utility size projects. But as we are talking about increasing the mitigation ambition, also is linked to increasing ambition of climate finance support. However, climate finance support has been insufficient in the region. 11 Arab states requested about $345 billion to finance conditional national determined contribution targets. But unfortunately, they receive on average of roughly 16 billion in climate specific.
That's a big difference.
Public international finance. Yes, as I said, climate finance support to the Arab region, we need it very badly, and the region needs it very badly.
There's a woeful difference in those two figures, 16 to 345, I believe.
345 billion, yes.
Yeah,
it's a very huge. And but most importantly, let me tell you, it is the adaptation which is our priority in our region. Temperature in the region is rising, water and food vulnerability is increasing, droughts and land degradation are driving food insecurity and a humanitarian crisis. Flash floods are damaging homes and shelters for those most vulnerable. And the most impact will be on the vulnerable groups and women. So adaptation is also a key priority for that region.
At the moment, I believe around 4 times the funding for climate mitigation is roughly 4 times greater than the funding for climate adaptation, something that you've just touched on as well. And you've also elaborated on that huge gulf in figures. Is there a very real risk that, as you've mentioned some climate risks yourself as well, and of course we know that some cities in the Middle East could be uninhabitable by 2050 and by the end of this century? That's quite a stark statement, uninhabitable cities, home to millions, hundreds of thousands of people, the risk of climate refugees and the social, political and economic fallout from that. These are almost sorts of challenges that haven't been fully grasped by the global community as well. Do you think that there's a very real risk here that funding is not going to hit that $345 million target? And what impact is that then going to have on the ground?
Yes, Michelle, it's very, we are concerned and worried, and we're trying to push forward to ensure that there is financing mechanisms available to our region. But let me tell you further what's the impact of the mitigation and the impact of climate change in our region. I come from Kuwait. In my home country of Kuwait, we have already registered daytime highs of 54 degrees centigrade in the shade.
Whoa.
Under the sun, it gets to be 75. And 𝖤𝗔𝗴 𝖫𝗶 initiative projects mean temperature increase of up to 5 degrees with a significant increase in very hot days, over 40 degrees. Also, we're projecting through 𝖤𝗔𝗴 initiative a declining precipitation that could leave 86% of a cropland highly vulnerable to water availability by the end of century.
And the World Bank has also set the region as the most risk worldwide from water scarcity as well. That's been a trend for several years now that's coming. So these aren't brand new risks. These are very well publicized risks. And is your concern that they're not being taken seriously enough on the ground, or they're not being understood enough on the ground, and then this is being reflected in the lack of finance adaptation?
Both. We are pushing, countries are realizing the importance of tackling climate change and addressing the issue of climate change and addressing the adaptation issues into it. At the same time, as I said, you can't address these issues without financing. And this is why we're thinking there's a couple of actions that needs to be taken. First, we need the donors must increase their quantity and quality of climate finance, massively increasing concessional finance, particularly for adaptation. Second, climate must be mainstreamed in all public expenditure and official development finance based on national priorities. Third, we need to align private sector finance with national climate objectives and deepen domestic capital markets to mobilize climate finance. Finance is a key issue to mitigate the impact of climate change in our region.
Because the Middle East has seen a rise in green sukuks, and also seen a rise in ESG financing as well over the last year. The UAE and Saudi Arabia, especially when it comes to the green sukuk side of things. Do you see that being enough in the right direction, or do you still think it's the tip of the iceberg, the progress that we have seen?
It's a tip on the iceberg, but also these are debt instruments, putting further pressure on already strained fiscal space in our region.
Especially with low oil prices.
Especially in oil prices, especially in middle income countries that are highly debted, especially in LDC countries. It is debt mechanisms are getting, these are important, but you can't keep on getting debt. We need
to keep chucking it on the pile.
Yes, we in our region, loans exceed the grants for climate action in the region by a factor of 10 to 1. We have 6 Arab LDCs receive less than 5% of climate finance flows in the region. Flows to the energy sector are 3 times higher than the flows to the water and sanitation, and 4 times higher than flows to agriculture and land use change. So we have a mismatch between grants and loans that needs to be addressed. The region can't afford to have more loans to address climate change. And this is where we came up at 𝖤𝗔𝗴 to support the need for predictable sources of long-term climate finance and to increase public international climate finance support. We started operationalizing the debt swap mechanism, and we initiated the initiative of debt swap mechanism. Where we
last December that this started.
Yes, last December we started on that operationalizing and putting the initiative of the debt swap, where we're engaging all stakeholders in a win-win solution between debtors, creditors, and donors to utilize debt servicing payments to achieving climate-aligned sustainable development objective in line with the implementation of SDGs and Paris Agreement.
What do you expect for that initiative this year? What are you hoping by December to have ticked off with that initiative? Like you say, time is really of the essence.
We are starting the initiative, we are engaging all the stakeholders, the debtor, the creditors, and the donors in that initiative, innovative initiative, putting them together, aligning the mechanism of it, and hosting it. And hopefully, we're hoping to at least to have one debt swap mechanism for climate adaptation by the end of this year with some of the Arab countries.
And which Arab countries are you seeing the most appetite for this initiative from? Which countries are stepping forward?
We're talking to Jordan, Egypt, and Tunisia. We think they are the first at the startup.
And of course, those countries, along with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are generally at the forefront of the new climate agenda in the region as well. So those names would almost be expected to be on there. Are there any other names, any outliers that are trying to step forward, that want to take that leap, that you expect to come forward this year? Countries that perhaps haven't been as public with their climate agenda?
We think the whole Arab countries are doing their revisiting and looking into their national determined contribution and applying their national determined contribution. But you know, this is a region that is composed of 22, the Arab countries composed of 22 Arab states. And the composition, you have high income countries, we have countries in conflict, like Qatar, like UAE, like Kuwait. You have countries in conflict. We have like Syria, Libya, Yemen. Okay, Somalia. We do have countries, middle income countries, like we're talking about Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Tunisia, Morocco. And we do have countries, least developed countries, like Somalia, Libya, Mauritania. So we do have different compositions, and different groups of countries within our region have different needs. Okay, but all of them share one important thing, is the adaptation issue. Adaptation is a priority in our region because it's impacting our water resources, it's impacting the climate change, it's impacting our food security into it. So it's impacting our resources and well-being, and impacting the vulnerable groups, the women, the children, because agriculture is a key sector in our economies. And
that directly links to that water scarcity as well. And that loops us back to how we started, and we can then very much, having done this circle, which is with some concerning statistics in there, most certainly, and perhaps some eye-raising numbers that will get some good attention. But do you feel that this year, after the momentum that built up last year, do you feel that this year we'll start to see more of those countries along that diverse scale that you mentioned in terms of socioeconomic development? Do you expect to see more of the countries along the scale coming forward and wanting to be more engaged in the debt swap initiative, for example, that you mentioned, wanting to be more vocal about their need for adaptation finance as well? Like I said, we have the strong leaders in the region already. Do you think that this year will be when others up their resources and step forward, so not due to a lack of interest, but due to their increased capability and their increased need?
Yes, but let me revisit something. The debt swap mechanisms could be addressed to certain countries in our region. Not every country in our region is eligible for the debt swap mechanisms into it. The high income countries in the region will not be eligible for the debt swap mechanisms into it. It is more tailored to the middle income countries that are highly debted. This is where that debt swap mechanism will be addressing. Least developed countries, usually they have grants more than debts. So they need much more grants, and they need flow of funds to them in the grants to address it. Middle income countries, because they are overburdened in their fiscal space with debts or stuff like that, they are more eligible to the debt swap into an initiative. And this is where we're addressing to swapping their debts, the highly debt, to climate adaptation, climate actions, measures and projects of it. So the debt swap mechanism is targeted to certain countries that are eligible. As for the high-income countries, we see, as I stated earlier, there is a deep interest and there is a commitment by these countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait.
But the others are what I'm interested to know about, because those are very public. They're very much at the forefront. But do you see us seeing more other middle-income countries in this coming year stepping forward and being more vocal about their need for climate adaptation and finance for climate adaptation?
Yes. You will see them because they're realizing it now is to recover forward better from COVID. You need to link COVID recovery with the climate crisis. Now the linkages of the climate crisis, tackling climate crisis is key to recover forward better from COVID. And this is where their voice will be heard. And I'm not gonna be saying only one country or two countries, it's all the countries, because this is impacting the livelihood of every single individual residing in the middle income countries or individuals residing in the Arab world. So part of recovering forward better from COVID is tackling COVID recovery with climate crisis.
The Build Back Better ethos that is certainly getting traction.
We always prefer to say we build forward better. We don't want to build backward in the same structures or stuff like that. It's a structural adjustments needs to be done also on our mechanism of building. So we prefer to talk about building forward better.
Build forward better. Excellent. Dr. Rolla, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for having us. Thank you.